Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasant afternoon to be with you guys. I think, as you can see, I'm in my office. I don't think there's a lot of people that understand at this moment how much joy I'm getting from being in my office and not having been here for 7 weeks was quite something. So it's pretty cool to be in the office. Everything is still standing and everybody is happy and everybody is healthy. So I'm very happy to be with you guys this afternoon. For guys that doesn't know me, I'm Silna Steyn. I'm the Managing Director of SSLR Incorporated. We're a law firm specializing in property law, so dedicated to property law. That's all we do, with a very strong focus on evictions. And so for everybody that knows us and know that we are doing evictions, the moment you saw we are talking about Ubuntu, I think you were super surprised, and everybody was slightly to medium concerned about what is happening now. And I have a very special guest with me today, Advocate Viljoen Meijers. He's an advocate from Group 16 from the Johannesburg Bar Council. And we had this conversation, started talking about Ubuntu about 2 years ago. And the moment we were in the midst of this COVID-19 crisis, and I started getting so many questions from landlords and tenants, there was nobody else that I thought of but Viljoen. So Viljoen, thank you so much for joining me for this webinar, and thank you so much for the time you spent helping me talking about Ubuntu, thinking about Ubuntu in the past 2 weeks. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Silna. It's great to be here. And yeah, if I can just give a shout out to everyone, welcome. And I hope that this discussion will be fruitful, not only to us, because it's an ongoing conversation, and we are also learning by doing this, but hopefully that everyone will understand Ubuntu in the legal context a little bit better after this.
Yes, I think it's such an important conversation to have. I must say, it's so weird for me to be on the other side of an interview. Usually I'm the one getting interviewed. Now I'm the one interviewing. And for me to interview an advocate, I don't think anybody expected that from me. But I think in an unprecedented time like we are now, we have so many questions from landlords, from tenants. How do we deal with the crisis that we are currently in? And what actually happened is I was on a call from a reporter from News 24 about 3 weeks ago. And she said, but what do we do when a landlord can't assist a tenant? Or what do we do when a landlord refuses to assist a tenant that can't pay rent? And it was almost an intuitive answer talking about Ubuntu. And I opened the door on Ubuntu, and I think everybody's seen the articles flying around now suddenly about Ubuntu in the landlord-tenant environment. And this is why I'm so grateful for you to have this conversation. I'm going to leave you to talk a lot, but just to put everybody in the picture, something very important when we talk about Ubuntu, I think people have a very interesting perception about Ubuntu. I think basically people don't know really what Ubuntu is. So in a judgment where Chief Justice Pius Langa, way back when, referred to this, he specifically said it's a culture which places some emphasis on community and on the interdependence of the members of a community. It recognizes a person's status as a human being, entitled to unconditional respect, dignity, value, and acceptance from the members of the community such person happens to be part of. It also entails the converse, however. The person has a corresponding duty to give the same respect, dignity, value, and acceptance to each other member of that community. More importantly, it regulates the exercise of rights by emphasis it lays on sharing and co-responsibility and the mutual enjoyment of rights for all. And I think this was the thing that got me, because we've seen so many, especially in the commercial, retail, industrial sphere of rentals, tenants that are actually in a position to pay rent, or at least partially pay their rent, are relying on things like this mile force majeure, things like that. And the answer to that cannot be you're not allowed to enforce your rights. Obviously, you're allowed to enforce your rights. But if you suddenly put the Ubuntu glasses on, it looks different. So did you want to explain what Ubuntu really is?
Sure. So, I mean, Ubuntu actually has quite a long history, and just personally, I mean, I've been working on this concept now for the past 2.5 years, and distributing a memo and opinion throughout the legal profession here in Johannesburg, especially Pretoria, Durban, Cape Town, and so it's gone quite a wide field. But Ubuntu effectively is a two-way street of relationship, and it has two core components. The one component is respect, or more in legal terms, the morality, and which then translates into reasonableness, fairness, good faith. And then you have the other component, which is love. And love in a legal context doesn't translate well.
But even I was surprised.
But legally, another way to refer to it is humaneness. So it's that mercy, it's that compassion. So legally, you use different terms, but so that the man on the street can understand this. It's effectively a respect and a love. It's effectively that morality and a humaneness. And that's what Ubuntu consists of. And yes, Ubuntu isn't just something which one party can use, and then the other party has to bow before it. It literally is this interaction, just like you quoted from Justice Langa, the interdependence of members of the community. And it's a beautiful thing if it's rightly approached, but because people don't understand how to approach it, it's actually causing a lot of fear in society and especially in legal circles.
100%. And I think something interesting, you used the word love. Can that word potentially be replaced by kindness? Simple, let's be people and be kind to each other. Is that a valid word to use here?
I would say yes, because kindness would fall within that humaneness concept. Humaneness is quite broad and wide. So you have that kindness and goodness, that I would say consideration that falls within that sphere. And yes, and then obviously you have the other side, the respect sphere as well.
Yes, exactly. And I think the fear that you are talking about, I think people sort of see this Ubuntu kindness thing as a potential thing that require them to allow themselves to be stepped on, because I think in our society we're so scared of not standing up for ourselves, and that very interesting part of society, which I'm thinking, what you are saying is, if it's a two-way street, it means you're not allowing somebody to stomple all over you, but at the same time you're not stepping onto anybody else. So it means we need to see each other exactly as Justice Langa said. We need to see each other as people. And I think for us as lawyers, it is so easy to see ourselves, to see the other party as the other party. And that's why we refer to each other as parties, because the moment you see somebody as a human being, it does make it more difficult to make difficult decisions. But at the same time, if we know, for instance, of, typically act mostly on behalf of landlords, if not exclusively, but here and there, there's a spoliation, which we will act on behalf of a tenant, but most of the times on behalf of a landlord. So if we start talking about Ubuntu on the side of the landlord, and now we need to look at the person we're evicting as a human being. For us, it's been easy because for the past 12 years, that's how we've been practicing evictions. And this is obviously with the Prevention of Illegal Evictions Act, to bring the personal circumstances into your court papers. It's really almost impossible to look at an eviction in terms of pie without seeing the other person as a human being. But I do suppose when it comes to an eviction, it is possible for a landlord to be almost a bit blunt to the other person's personal circumstances, because the truth is the human side does happen in the court papers, but luckily it's only the attorney seeing that side, and we need to deal with those emotions. But as a landlord, what does applying Ubuntu really mean?
Well, I think that as a landlord as well as a tenant, it's those obligations and the enforcement of the right during the whole working of the contract, during this whole relationship. Because there's usually, let's say there's a lease in place, then something happens, the landlord comes to the party, maybe gives more time for the tenant to do something, or the landlord provides additional things over and above even what it has to provide in terms of this agreement. And that's actually showing Ubuntu. Landlords do that in contracts the whole time. And even in court papers, we see this very often. We see that it's not the first breach which is called out. There's actually been a process. There has been, if I can say, grace given. There has actually been compassion shown. There has been humaneness shown. And yet, because the landlords do not think of it in the context of Ubuntu, it gets left behind. And then the only portion in which Ubuntu comes to the fore is then when the tenant raises it as a type of defense. Where if the landlord can say, no, but in the way that we have transacted and negotiated, we have actually acted in the spirit. We have actually acted in this way. So that's where the power comes in. If parties start to look at this interaction, they'll actually see that in many respects they have been applying these principles all along throughout their transaction. The difficulty then comes in is when a certain point of no return is reached. Then all of a sudden the way that something is enforced is contrary to the way that this whole relationship ran. And that's where some of the problem then comes in, because then all of a sudden there is no leeway at all that is given. And I think that's where the parties are missing the point. And the tenants have to come to the party as well, because they have been receiving all of this benefit all along. They've been receiving maybe grace throughout the period of the tenancy over and above what has been stated. Or maybe they also have acted in Ubuntu by paying their rent at an earlier period than when it was due. If it was due at the end of the month, maybe they've been paying their rent, in the middle of the month, which also shows an element of Ubuntu. So the parties must look a little bit wider at this concept. But it's actually not a concept which should be scary at all. It's a concept where you have that respect, you have that love. It is shown. Let's rather say morality and humaneness. Otherwise, we'll be classified as something else in terms of the law. But the morality and the humaneness is there. It has been shown. You must just bring it to the fore, and then the courts can see, okay, Ubuntu has been applied, but here there is something which has to be worked on. Here's an area where it hasn't been applied, and that's where you have to take it into account. It's not something which will take away the rights of parties, unless the right has been phrased in such a manner as to be patently unfair, patently unreasonable, completely out of bounds. Then it will impact on it. But strangely enough, then it will impact as a portion of the public policy mix. So you've got a little bit of a different dynamic there. And we'll touch upon that a little bit later. Where Ubuntu is applied directly is where it can change and shape the common law. And the common law rules, almost those unwritten contractual rules on which society functions. But yes, landlords and tenants, they have corresponding rights and duties, responsibilities, obligations, call it what you will. It is truly a two-way street. And if people start to look at it that way, it takes out the fear.
Yes, I agree with you. So if we make this practical, currently what we are seeing is a number of landlords that is stuck in a position where their tenants are refusing to pay their rent because they are relying on things like Visma or force majeure, supervening impossibility, all of those things. I just want to clarify for everybody that's watching, all those things I've just referred to will be common law or contractual rights that gives a tenant, or well, a party to an agreement, the right to withhold performance. So a lot of tenants at this stage are relying on that to say, I've been in a retail premises in terms of the lockdown regulations, be it the full lockdown, level 4, whatever the case is. I don't have use of my premises, and so I don't have to pay my rent. And we've seen that a lot of times, and a lot of those tenants are actually able to pay rent, or at least partially, but they are invoking these rights, which President Ramaphosa so clearly said. I think it was on the extension of the lockdown period. I think we were also traumatized. We didn't really listen to what he was saying, but he specifically asked the tenants do not rely exclusively on these rights just because it is there. And I do believe he was playing straight into Ubuntu. But at the same time, we have a lot of tenants that really can't pay rent, and that we see in commercial, retail, industrial, as well as residential. I almost want to say, especially residential, where somebody got retrenched or he's on no work, no pay. There is no money coming in. He can't pay his rent. And we have landlords. Viljoen, I must say, in the property industry right now, there are moments where I get goosebumps to see what landlords are doing for their tenants. It's absolutely beautiful. Landlords that are struggling financially as well, but they are giving their tenants deferred rental payments or even reduced rental payments. Quite a few of my clients gave like 50%. You don't have to repay me reduced rentals, and there's no legal requirement on a landlord to do that, but they are doing that. What is the position on the landlord that really can't? He's stuck in a position where he can't give the tenant a deferred payment. Let's say, for argument's sake, his property is fully bonded. His rates and taxes, he's not even on break even. And he is suffering. He can't give the tenant that leeway. The tenant's asking for that, but the tenant has no income. The landlord in that situation, looking at eviction now in the future, I think we're going to see, unfortunately, quite a lot of evictions. We want to help our landlords and tenants to get through this as peacefully and as calmly as possible. What is a landlord to do in a situation like that, where you really can't allow a tenant a rent deferment or something like that? How do you demonstrate, or how do you act in the spirit of Ubuntu, where you really can't help somebody? Does that mean Ubuntu is out of the door? What does that look like?
Thanks for giving me a very easy question to answer. You know, no, but before I answer that question, I'm just quickly reminded of the correction I just need to make. In the beginning, you said Group 16, part of the Johannesburg Bar Council, but it's just the Johannesburg Bar. So
I'm sorry.
No, I just want to make that correction. Let me not get into trouble. I mean, Group 16, a bunch of advocates, and they're brilliant at what they do. And it's also given me the environment to dig a little bit deeper, because you have to, when you're against the best, you have to be the best. And yeah, so I just want to correct that. It's part of the Johannesburg Bar, not the Johannesburg Bar Council. So
I'm sorry, Johannesburg Bar.
Now, what a landlord is to do, if you look at Ubuntu in this type of context, because it considers not only the actions that both parties took during the currency of this lease agreement, but the critical factor would be where you are sitting now. So the history will play a role, but where you are sitting now, at the key point, or the point of the explosion, where everything now goes wrong, where you're sitting with litigation, that is going to be the key point. So the landlord must actually bring his circumstances to the fore, because they will be considered, just like the tenant's circumstances will be considered. If the landlord is in such a position that he actually cannot afford to give rental reductions or to receive payments late. And the tenant is actually in a position where he can afford to pay an amount, maybe the full amount, maybe a part of the amount, an apportioned amount at least, and he chooses not to pay at all. Then I think if that is set out on the basis of Ubuntu, because it's a two-way street of relationship, because it looks at the morality and the humaneness on both sides, the court will say, well, this does favor the landlord and will enforce the landlord's rights, probably without any type of extension to the tenant. If it's the other way around, where the landlord does have the capacity to have humaneness, to show that morality, that respect, and he doesn't do that, and the tenant really is in a position not to be able to pay, it won't take away the rights of the landlord to that payment, to sue for that payment, or even to obtain an eviction. Then it will determine the period that you're dealing with, just like considering all those factors. But I think the key, which many landlords miss, is that they don't put their circumstances on the table. They try to just look at the contract and say, well, this is the obligation you have. But that's no longer good enough. We're dealing with a different world now. The COVID-19 epidemic has, that has changed the way that society relates to each other. With regards to Ubuntu and that type of relationship, where it's not just about the individuals or even about landlord and tenant, but it deals with a larger society that is impacted. Ubuntu comes to the fore, and a different way of contracting and a different way of enforcing those contracts comes to the fore. I mean, what I see with regards to the figures, and I've just quickly looked at the worldwide infection rate figures, where we're standing at just above 3.5 million people worldwide infected with this COVID-19. And the death toll is standing just over 250,000 people, so at about 7%. And in South Africa, we're standing at about 7,220 infections with about 138 deaths, so about 2% death rate. What is encouraging is you see this recovery rate as well, which we are now also publishing. So worldwide recovery is 1.2 million people. Recovery is locally about 2,746. So we're dealing with 33% recovery worldwide, 38% locally. And it's almost as if that recovery gives that hope. It almost gives that injection of something which we really need. It's almost as if that is a little portion of humanity. I think that is where Ubuntu in this context also comes in. It gives that humaneness to our relationships. And we have to have that humaneness. We're having a culture where we are so diverse that if we are not humane towards each other, but we also do not comply with our responsibilities, our obligations, then it won't work. The key is it's not the one or the other, but it's an thing. It's both. Yes. It's both. Yes. The morality and the humanity. And Ubuntu comprises both. And one of the keys, at least with regards to for the legal fraternity, is there seems to be in cases, and I guess that's the way that we are. We fight a client's case. So we fight a client's case, and sometimes we do it so one-sided that the way that it reflects in the various courts is it's this one-sided battle, and and then the courts cannot apply this concept correctly. But Ubuntu is not averse to the sanctity of contracts. The principles are actually to be applied together.
Exactly, because what's interesting is how much, and I'm going to say specifically lawyers, the moment we start talking about Ubuntu, you get this a bit of a pushback, like we don't want to hear this story, but the truth is, we've anyway had the Boni Mores, which is good morals, which is in line with bona fides, being help me out on bona fides, better word there,
Oh, good, good stuff, good stuff.
No, sorry?
Well, bonafide, it's almost like you're doing it in good faith. So that would be a
Exactly.
better,
Good faith.
better way.
Good faith is the word I'm looking for. And it's already been an entrenched part of our law. But now because Ubuntu doesn't feel like it's something we've seen a lot, the moment that article was published through News 24, which was very interesting. A lot of people said to me, Sona, clearly this lockdown didn't do you well. You've lost it completely. You know, it's the ducks are not in rows. Like everything is going very bad for you. You've lost it. And to me, Ubuntu, and I suppose it's because of the past 2 years conversations that you and I have been having around bringing Ubuntu into specifically evictions, because I do think it is 100% in line with what the Prevention of Illegal Evictions Act are saying, as well as Section 26 of the Constitution, which says nobody may be evicted without a court ordering to do so after their personal circumstances has been taken into consideration. Now, those personal circumstances, good morals, everybody that's just being a human being, that has anyway been part of our law. But tell me, Ubuntu, in my head, is 100% part of our law. But I know the courts apply it slightly differently. Is Ubuntu a legal principle? Can we say it's a legal principle in terms of the South African law?
Without a doubt, Ubuntu is in fact the bedrock. It's the bedrock on which our constitutional impact has been built. So it's not just the part of our law. It is the very basis of our law in South Africa. It's actually the very basis of our democracy. And I cannot say better than quoting something from the Constitutional Court in Everfresh Market, Virginia, VOLTD versus ShopRite Checkers in 2012, which seems to be the classical case where the door has been opened for Ubuntu to be applied in contracts. But in that specific case, they said that it wasn't pleaded properly, so therefore it wasn't right to apply it in that respect. But at paragraph 71, the court expressed the following opinion. Said, had the case been properly pleaded, a number of interlinking constitutional values would inform a development of the common law. Indeed, it is highly desirable and in fact necessary to infuse the law of contract with constitutional values, including values of Ubuntu, which inspire much of our constitutional compact. On a number of occasions in the past, this court has had regard to the meaning and the content of the concept of Ubuntu. It emphasizes the communal nature of society and carries in it the idea of humaneness, social justice, and fairness, and envelops the key values of group solidarity, compassion, respect, human dignity, conformity to collective unity. And then in paragraph 72, and this is where this, and I think many people miss this. If I read the cases, it seems if there is a bit of a missing, not because the Supreme Court of Appeal maybe misunderstood it, but I think the way that it was maybe presented. If you look at many of the High Court cases, the same. And in paragraph 72 of this Everfresh judgment, the court says the following: were a court to entertain Everfresh's argument, the underlying notion of good faith in contract law, the maxim of contractual doctrine that agreements seriously entered into should be enforced. Now that's the Latin term pacta sunt servanda. As much of our constitutional compact.
Oh, Viljoen, I think Viljoen, I'm sorry. We lost you there. You had a bit of a glitch there, and just when you were saying the appeal court, and then you threw a beautiful Latin term. Halfway through the Latin term, Zoom decided we don't understand Latin. So can we take it from there again?
Well, yeah, it must be. It must be, because I mean that's probably why Latin is no longer part of many of the legal curriculums that broke the internet.
It
So
broke the internet. Sorry, Zoom.
I'll leave the Latin out, but it said the courts expressed, it said the underlying notion of good faith in contract law, the maxim of contractual doctrine that agreements seriously entered into should be enforced, and the value of Ubuntu, which inspires much of our constitutional compact, make tilt the argument in its favor. Contracting parties certainly need to relate to each other in good faith. So we see that there are three components there. Ubuntu and the sanctity of contracts and what parties agree to. They're not separate, they are together. We have to find that balance.
That's brilliant. And I think this is so important. I think it's up to us as lawyers, the advocates, the attorneys right now, in taking our matters to court, to bring the principles of Ubuntu to the court. Because the truth is, we cannot rely on presiding officers, judges, magistrates, even commissioners in the Rental Housing Tribunal to raise this, because that's not how the law works. You have to bring the law to the court, and the court will then decide. So it's up to us,
Exactly.
as let's say specifically eviction lawyers on behalf of landlords, to bring those principles to the forefront as much as we have to, in compliance with the Constitution as well as by bring the personal circumstances of the tenant to the court. What you are saying is, as the eviction lawyers on behalf of the landlords, we need to bring the similar personal circumstances to court, and also show to the court this landlord really tried everything. He couldn't give the tenant a rent reduction even when the tenant had no income because of COVID-19. If we are simply silent on these matters, we push to court, the court will frown on this and say, whoa, Mr. Landlord, did you see what was happening in the world during COVID-19? But at the same token, am I right in saying the landlord, the tenant that can demonstrate, he approached the landlord, he asked him for rent reduction, the landlord simply refused to make contact with the tenant, he refused to engage with him, he placed him on terms cancelled and is commencing with eviction. Am I correct in saying we are very likely going to see quite a few courts frowning on landlords like that? So we're not saying the landlord should be giving a rent reduction. What we are saying is, guys, please just engage with each other as human beings. If you can't help, at least keep that communication in writing. Explain to the tenant why you're not in a financial position to assist, and that will put the landlord in a stronger position for an eviction. Am I sort of on point?
Oh, definitely. You're 100% on point. Because Ubuntu, that what we're dealing with here is we're dealing with African good faith. So, or you can maybe even say good faith on steroids. And
Love that.
yeah, maybe we should stay away from that. But this isn't athletic, so we should be okay. And African good faith is effectively, it looks at that relationship, but it looks at the wider impact, the community impact. So that's where something like COVID-19 and the impact that it has on society comes into play. But we do need to learn to present a balanced view to the court with regards to this Ubuntu and on both what has been done. And once we do that, once we do that, then we'll be able to take the fear out of this concept. The concept will reach a stability where people can also understand. And I think we need to concentrate on maybe those words like respect and humaneness, instead of just concentrating on the word Ubuntu. Because Ubuntu, if you just take it like this, it could be confusing. So put it into your legal terms, put it into the accepted legal terms, and explain to the court, well, this accepted legal term is part of this Ubuntu package. Put it before them, and then then it should be smooth sailing.
It's absolutely amazing. It's absolutely mind-blowing, and I'll say this at the risk of being unfriended by a few people, but it's interesting for me. Now you're scared. It's interesting for me how something as simple as saying to people in the property industry, specifically landlords, tenants, rental agents, everybody, when I'm saying, guys, let's just consider each other. It's so interesting for me how society developed to a place where it's difficult to even think about considering another person's needs and circumstances. So that's I won't leave it. I won't leave you to comment on that. But I must say I find it quite interesting, and I think that's why you're referring to the fear, because people feel if I have to give away some of my rights, but that's not what we're saying. It feels like if I have to be nice to you, what if you're not going to be nice? What if you're not going to be nice to me as well? Like but what you are saying is it must be a two-way street, and to apply it in our law is a two-way street.
Of course, it is a two-way street. It hasn't been brought to the fore as such, except in a few cases. If we actually look at the way that Ubuntu has been placed before our courts, there's been more than 150 cases from 1994 where Ubuntu has been referred to. Most of the cases in the public policy context. And then there's about 30 specific cases where you're looking at the principle of Ubuntu as a primary concept. And it's interesting to also plot the trajectory, because 26 years ago until today, about 150 cases. 10 years ago until today, half of those cases. 5 years ago until today, a third of those cases. So there's a huge pickup in Ubuntu. And it's very important that we learn to apply it correctly, and that people will realize that in different spheres of the law, for example, in property law with evictions, you're going to apply it a little bit differently than you will between borrower and lender. A little bit differently than you will between buyer and seller. And so there will be slight differences, but the two core elements, the humaneness, the respect, the morality, those two core elements, they will remain. The balance will just shift a little bit in various areas of the law, but they will remain. So we have a fixed basis for that. But the power of Ubuntu is in that flexibility. And if we have learned anything through this COVID-19 crisis, is we need to be flexible. We need to look after each other's interests as well, because no, money cannot protect us against a virus like this. We don't stand alone. We stand in that interdependence, as Justice Langa said. It is truly that. And in South Africa especially, with our diverse community and society, if we don't have that interdependence among each other, then we won't really build this strong democracy, which I have a lot of hope for. And I believe that we are on the right track. And this crisis has actually brought a lot of that goodness, that kindness that you mentioned in the beginning of this broadcast to the fore.
I'm so glad you said that. I have Rowan here, and I think we're gonna go to a few questions now. So for everybody that's watching live on Facebook, welcome to post your questions in the comments. Rowan will manage that for us. But I think something important while everybody is typing questions, Viljoen, I don't know, I never know when you live on Facebook and you ask for questions, you never know what's going to happen. It could be a million questions, it could be nothing, because everybody's in complete shock for the moment. But I think something very important to mention is Ubuntu has definitely saved lives, a lot of lives, because the case that I referred to when we started was when I referred to the quote from Justice Pius Langa was from S versus Makonyane. So for most people, S versus Makonyane means nothing. For every lawyer, when you hear S versus Makonyane, you know it's a very big deal, because S versus Makonyane is the case where the death sentence ended. And Ubuntu was one of the bases of the reasons why we've ended our death sentence. So now I know, bringing up the death sentence in a conversation, I know there is people that's passionately against having a death sentence. Personally, I am not a fan, but to think that something like Ubuntu saved lives, I think that's profound. And I think if we bring that into the conversation, and now we're talking landlords, tenants, a crisis in the world, how do we interact with each other? And people are thinking, no, but Ubuntu can't really be part of our law. Well, Ubuntu is such a strong part of our law that was one of the founding positions in our constitution. As you've mentioned, now I'm going to put you on the spot. Viljoen wrote the most amazing memo on Ubuntu. So for the lawyers out there, I think if you pop me a mail, I can put you in contact with Viljoen, or you can just find him at group 16. And because I know he's willing to share that opinion. And you make a lot of reference to that, and you refer to the interim constitution, which actually used the term Ubuntu, and currently still in a few pieces of, well, already, let's not say still, already in a few pieces of legislation, like what is that, the Children's Act, it does specifically refer to Ubuntu by name.
Yes, and then you also have some references which are not, I want to say, which are not so overt references, but more of a covert reference. In the Consumer Protection Act, there are certain sections there. When you read it, you can just see this is permeating with Ubuntu. But Ubuntu goes a lot further. It actually goes a lot further than just South African law. That exact case of Eswes Makmanyane has been referred to by the Constitutional Court in Uganda as well. And where they said in a judgment of Salvatore Abuki and another versus Attorney General, and this was in 1997, but they actually said that the concept of Ubuntu was not only embraced by all the communities of Uganda, but was a mark of civilized society. And we find Ubuntu has not only gone there, but in the United Nations. It's actually been referred to so many times. So it's not just a concept and a legal principle now, because it didn't start out as a legal principle, but that's a discussion for another day. But it's a legal principle now, and especially with that African relational aspect to this principle, that a crisis like this COVID crisis has shown that we need. We need it here in this country, we need it throughout Africa, but we also need it worldwide. And the basis is there. The basis is there as long as we can take it and translate it into those things to say it's humaneness and it's morality. It's respect, it's love. You look at all the societies, there's a balance between those factors. In every single country, every single society. So Ubuntu has really that capacity to change society for better.
Yes. Oh, that was beautiful. I have goosebumps now. I hope everybody else has goosebumps, because I must say it's exactly that. It's beautiful. Rowan, tell me, sir, do we have questions?
Yes, we do. We have a question or two. Let me get started. We've got one from Anthony Blackbeard, who asks, what is the impact of Ubuntu on homeowners associations who are charging building penalties on vacant stands that are not building right now? Well, in his view, this is unconstitutional. So if you have any comment on that.
Well, I think we have to realize that a lot of those compacts are governed by a certain contractual compact. So we're going to have to look at that contract, and then we're going to have to see, is it a term which may be unreasonable within that? And if it's a term, then Ubuntu is going to form part of the public policy mix to either enforce the term or not to enforce the term. However, if the concept is, or if the contract is actually against a common law term, or the common law term is failing to address the needs currently, then Ubuntu may be used in order to develop the common law, either by adding and expanding upon the current common law term, or by replacing that with something else, or even, and this is where it gets really exciting, by creating something entirely new. Those things haven't been done yet, and obviously maybe Mr. Blackbeard must, you know, follow this up, but he should just mention it from the get-go, because that's what the courts now want. So deal with it from the beginning, in letters, and then all the way through. But obviously, with all of these things, you need to go for proper legal advice. So I would say, you know, approach your attorney and get proper legal advice with regards to that. There are solutions, but you actually have to look at what is the contractual sphere in which they are operating. Homeowner associations also have certain regulations that apply to them, certain statutes that apply to them as well. So you have to take all of that in the mix, and then Ubuntu can also come in. It's not a factor that is used on its own.
That's very interesting. The good news, Viljoen, is Anthony is a colleague. He's an attorney, a good friend. I actually know that I think we currently have more lawyers watching than anybody else, to be quite honest. So I think exactly because that is a question now from Anthony. I'm very excited to see how interested all the lawyers are in this conversation, because Viljoen, you will agree with me. If Anthony has an instruction from an HOA or from a client against an HOA, to already bring those things into our correspondence, that's going to be absolutely beautiful to take it into court so we can develop this, right?
And I think that's part of the keys. The sooner you bring it into your correspondence, into your interactions, the sooner you flesh it out, the more fully a court will be able to look at it, deal with it, and then actually create the law which gives that certainty, which everyone is after.
Beautiful.
Because, I mean, just something as an aside, the principle of Ubuntu doesn't just scare a lot of people in South Africa, a lot of lawyers in South Africa. It also scares international entities, international companies from using South African law. So it's in our own interest to develop this concept properly, because we're not going to get rid of this concept. We cannot ignore this concept. It's the bedrock on which our constitution is built. And if you think about it, especially in this time of COVID-19, we've seen that it is actually a bedrock of society. That humaneness, that morality is actually a bedrock of society, which makes you question, well, if this is the bedrock of society and it's only coming to the fore now, you know, what was society based on previously?
That's scary, right?
That's maybe a different discussion.
No, but I think it's good, Rowan. Before you go to the next question, I think it's important for us as lawyers. I think we're so spoiled, and I'm sorry for all the non-lawyers in this conversation, but we were spoiled with all the jurists before us who created the law, and we're still relying on Foot and Groot and all these jurists to do. And we need to appreciate that we are, in this new era of law, we are the jurists that should take this and clarify what it is. So we need to bring these matters to court so we can build a truly South African legal system, which is based on something that is actually not scary. We are simply basing this on, this is a principle of good faith. And to be honest, if we don't live in a society of good faith, I don't really want to hang out here, because good faith is sort of what human life should be about.
Where
Yes,
we're
well,
actually on that topic. Sorry, you go, Viljoen.
No, go for it.
So where did you say that? Because one of the questions is from Alison Williams, who says, will this COVID-19 time not change the law around contra bonus mores in South Africa forever? I.e., what goes against the general sense of justice of the community now at this time will be very different from anything we have ever experienced before. So that does play into what we were just explaining now.
Alison, also
Okay,
a lawyer, one of the best contract drafting lawyers I know. all my favorite lawyers.
Well, I just wanted to say that's probably one of the best questions I asked on this topic. And I think that if you look at Ubuntu before this crisis, then the answer would have been no, because as the current law stands, and as the Constitutional Court has crystallized it, Ubuntu applied directly will only change and be used to develop a common law rule. So that's where it applies. But with regards to terms of an agreement and anything lesser than a common law rule, public policy is the answer to which Ubuntu is merely a part. However, we're now dealing with a situation where the world has changed, and it has created this environment where the humaneness and the morality is coming to the fore and is now expected as well from various parties and various people in society. Just look at the fact of the hand sanitizers and the masks, the initial sales at the exorbitant prices where the government then stepped in and actually brought those down and said, no, you can make profit, but it must be within reason. So yes, Alison, Ubuntu is, and I think this is safe to say, Ubuntu is going to be playing a larger role in the normal interactions, and it is going to be easier to bring it to the fore. But it is going to be something which has to be brought to the fore in a balanced view and in a balanced manner. Not just one party stating, well, this is just my right, this is what I'm entitled to. But you have to look at the other side. If it's brought in that way to the fore, then I think that we can change all for the better. Because unfortunately, the law is a little bit slow, or very slow, to develop. And I think with all of the forced lockdown and shutdown and the other things that we are still dealing with, we've had to embrace technology. Hopefully that will help the law to speed up as well.
Fantastic. Then I have another question here. It says, at this stage, how far can Ubuntu go, as this pandemic will probably last a couple of months? What this is, sorry, screen went weird. What I mean is, if as a landlord you agree for a tenant to pay half the rent, how long can that be applied? That would obviously particularly be in terms of the agreement between your clients. I don't think Ubuntu would be too much applicable in that situation.
I think what the question is about is, would the impact of Ubuntu mean that a landlord was nice now for April, May, June rent to reduce? Would Ubuntu then require the landlord to carry this tenant further? And I think, Viljoen, if I can grab this question, the simple answer from what you were saying is simply, as soon as the landlord is then in a position where it's not financially possible for him to continue with that, he is 100% within his rights to again contact the tenant and say, listen, Mr. Tenant, it's been fabulous. I could help you this far, but unfortunately, I won't be able to any further. And I think he's satisfied his obligations fully, even if he can't carry the landlord further. And I think, to clarify on that, Viljoen, correct me if I'm wrong, but Ubuntu doesn't require you to cut your own throat off to save another. It's simply, let's work together. So the moment the landlord is in a position where he can't help, Yes. I think that's a good answer. The two-way street thing. So the moment the landlord can't help anymore, but I would like to see communication, not then suddenly, just place him on terms and start with an eviction. I would just like to see some communication, ideally in writing, so we can go to a court to just show this is what happened if a tenant raises that.
Yeah, and I think maybe this is a good place to speak to not only the attorneys, because the attorneys will usually advise their clients to keep things in writing, but maybe the public must just realize that you need things in writing. Oral agreements provide problems. It might provide lovely legal challenges, but I'd actually prefer if everything is in writing. So rather have something in writing, go to a lawyer, let them put it in writing, and it would be a good idea to incorporate Ubuntu at that point in time.
Fantastic. Then we've got one last question. Does Ubuntu apply if the tenant hasn't been paying the rent for the past 4 months pre the coronavirus lockdown?
So I think it's important to realize that Ubuntu isn't, I know guys, and now I'm talking to all landlords, tenants, agents. Ubuntu isn't like a on and off switch. Have you applied Ubuntu or not? It's simply, if the tenant hasn't been paying his rent going into lockdown, it would be a little weird for the landlord to reduce rent without having a conversation about the outstanding amount. So even a landlord in a situation like that says to a tenant, you know what, you owe me 4 months rent. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to have to charge you a certain amount of rent still, but we need to sign an acknowledgement of debt to pay off the arrears. Ubuntu isn't an eraser of debt. Ubuntu is let's work together. The tenant that's already in bridge is going to have a bit of a hard time to show that he was displaying Ubuntu as well, because he hasn't been paying his rent. He hasn't been in communication with the landlord about why he hasn't been paying rent. So the landlord would be required.
And so if I can just jump in there, and you can just finish it off. But the fact that the landlord has allowed the tenant all those months where the tenant has defaulted to still stay on in the property actually shows that the landlord applied Ubuntu even before this. So in that type of situation, I don't think the court would be very open to listen to other extensions and requests from the tenant, because the landlord already showed it. But the landlord would have to put this into the right context.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. You can't rely on this principle by saying, oh, but the landlord has to be nice to me, except you haven't been paying your rent for 4 months. It's a two-way street.
Yeah.
So Ubuntu doesn't require the landlord to be nice to the tenant beyond what can ever be expected of him. It requires this two-way street interaction. Was that it, Roy?
Yes. Sorry, I was just trying to double check, but that is all the questions that we have today.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, guys. It's been absolutely wonderful. Viljoen, I do suspect that there's going to be much more questions after this, and I think almost, especially from the lawyers that's been watching and that will still watch this, if they have questions, is there any way that I can ask you to how they can contact you and ask further questions? Because I think this is such a crucial conversation to have between us. Obviously, landlords, tenants, agents, more than happy to contact SSLR for any questions. But if somebody wants to get in contact with you, can I put you on the spot like this and ask if there's a way to contact you?
Yeah, I mean, sure. there's no issue with regards. We can even have another webinar where we address questions that you do receive. But with regards to the principle of Ubuntu, the principle must get out. It's an understanding that must get out. So, I mean, this is not, how can I say, this isn't a secret piece of knowledge. This opinion, this memo, this free research has already been distributed to more than 500 attorneys, as I already said, in Johannesburg. So it's not as if, ooh, you know, I hold the key. I really don't. People must just understand how to apply this morality and this humaneness for the benefit of us all, for the benefit of South Africa and generations to come.
Brilliant. And I think what we should do is I'm very happy to post your full memo. It's long, guys. Remember, you know SSLR as being like, you know, we're lawyers, but we're attorneys. It's a different thing. Viljoen is a real advocate. So when he says something, he says it's in, I think, 32 pages, right?
So, no, it was only 26.
Only 26.
Only.
So I think we will make it available on our Facebook page. If you're happy with that, Viljoen, we'll chat about that. We'll then let you know where to find it or how to get into contact with Viljoen if you want to explore this further, lawyers. Everybody else, I think it's so important for us to appreciate the importance of Ubuntu in our society, to get away from the fear it creates, but get into it's this nice soft landing blanket. Right now we are all struggling, and we will all suffer financial loss and financial hardship, and this is potentially just a soft landing, just to soften the blow between the parties without taking the gun out of your hand. So if you are in a situation where you need to rely on the law to evict your tenant, where you need to approach a court to interdict your landlord from kicking you out right now while you're not allowed to move, those rights aren't being impacted by Ubuntu. It's not getting, we won't take anything away with Ubuntu. Ubuntu is adding, it's not taking away. And I think that's a very important message to get across.
Yeah, I think it's adding, and it has to do with how you enforce it. In this new social compact that we are in, we see many contracts. How you enforce it is a little bit different. So that's where it comes to the fore. It doesn't take away the rights. You have your rights. It's just how you apply it. That's it.
That's brilliant. Viljoen, any last comments from you before we close?
No, I think let's just start to walk on this two-way street of relationship, and let's start to bring Ubuntu to the fore, because it will be to the benefit of the whole of South Africa. I truly believe that, and this is a concept which can actually benefit the entire world when we look at what the world is going through now. This is not a time to just look after your own interests. This is a time to look at the bigger picture. So let's look at the bigger picture of the people in South Africa. Let's look at the bigger picture of the people in Africa. And let's look at the bigger picture of the people worldwide.
Thank you, guys. I don't know about you, but I'm definitely, you know, I don't think I've ever had a webinar where I had goosebumps so many times, because it really resonates. I hope with a lot of people. It was absolutely brilliant. Once again, this is Advocate Viljoen Meijers from Group 16 from the Johannesburg Bar. It was an absolute honor to have you with us, Viljoen. Thank you so much for clarifying this. And thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you so much, Rowan, for managing the questions. And
welcome.
Really, it's been an absolute pleasure spending the afternoon with you. Have a lovely afternoon.
Same here.
And stay safe out there, everyone.